My first night as a security guard wasn't supposed to be anything special. Just a quiet shift at a rundown warehouse on the outskirts of town. The company was small, barely functioning, and I figured the job would be easy walk around, check the doors, sit in the control room, repeat until sunrise. No big deal. When I arrived, the sun was already setting, casting long shadows over the cracked pavement and rusted metal gates. The warehouse was huge, much larger than I had expected, with towering walls and broken windows. It gave it a gloomy, almost abandoned feel. My boss had mentioned the place used to be bustling with activity years ago, but now most of it was just unused space. I met the day shift guard as he was clocking out. He was an older guy, looked like he'd been doing this job for years. He gave me a nod, handed over the keys, and muttered, "Nothing ever happens here, but keep your head on straight." I laughed it off, figuring it was just his way of welcoming the new guy. He didn't laugh back. The first few hours were uneventful. I made my rounds, checked the perimeter, and made sure all the doors were locked. The warehouse was filled with dusty old crates, some of them marked with labels that had faded long ago. The air smelled musty, like old wood and rust, and there was a constant low hum from the flickering overhead lights that made the place feel even more deserted. Around midnight, I settled into the small control room at the front of the building. It had a few ancient monitors connected to cameras that covered the major entrances and hallways. The resolution was terrible, grainy black and white footage that was barely useful, but it gave me a sense of control. I grabbed a coffee from the machine in the corner and tried to relax. Just 6 more hours, I told myself, ... That's when I heard it, a loud, metallic clang, like something heavy had fallen. I jumped, nearly spilling my coffee. I stared at the monitors, but everything looked normal. No movement, no one in sight. I grabbed my flashlight and headed toward the sound. The warehouse was massive, with endless corridors and rooms full of old equipment. The echo made it hard to pinpoint where the noise had come from, but it felt like it was deep inside, somewhere I hadn't checked yet. As I walked down one of the long, narrow hallways, my flashlight flickered. The shadows danced on the walls, making everything seem distorted and wrong. I told myself it was just the old electrical wiring, that the lights were faulty, but my heart was already racing. I turned a corner and saw one of the large metal doors at the far end of the hallway standing slightly open. I was sure I had locked that door earlier. I approached it slowly, my hand gripping the flashlight so hard my knuckles turned white. The air felt colder here, like the temperature had dropped a few degrees in just a matter of steps. I pushed the door open with a loud creak, shining my light into the room. It was filled with rows of old filing cabinets covered in dust and cobwebs, the kind of place no one had been in for years. Nothing seemed out of place. Then, from behind one of the cabinets, I heard breathing. My pulse quickened. It wasn't my imagination. There was someone or something in here with me. The sound was soft at first, barely audible, but it grew louder, more ragged, like whoever or whatever it was struggling to breathe. I raised my flashlight and called out, "Who's there?" No response. The breathing stopped. For a moment, there was dead silence, the kind that presses against your ears, making everything seem too loud in contrast. I took a few steps back, trying to decide if I should go check or just leave. Something deep inside me was screaming to get out of there. Suddenly, the door behind me slammed shut with a loud bang. I spun around, my flashlight shaking in my hand. The doorknob was rattling, like someone was trying to open it from the other side, but I had just come through it. It shouldn't have been locked. Panic set in. I rushed to the door, yanking on the knob, but it wouldn't budge. The rattling stopped, replaced by a soft scratching sound from the other side. My throat tightened, and I pressed my ear to the door, listening. There was whispering low, unintelligible, like a conversation just beyond my understanding. It didn't sound like a single voice, but many overlapping, murmuring just out of reach. I stumbled back, scanning the room for another exit. There was nothing. I was trapped. The only light came from my flashlight, and it was starting to flicker again. Then I saw it. At the far end of the room, in the corner where the shadows were thickest, something moved. It was subtle at first, just a shift in the darkness, but then it became clearer. A figure, hunched and distorted, crawled out from behind the cabinets. It was too large to be a person, its limbs unnaturally long, and its face, what little I could see, was twisted, like it had been stretched beyond recognition. It stared at me, its hollow eyes gleaming in the faint light, and I could feel its gaze pierce through me. The air grew colder, the smell of rot filling the room. I backed away, pressing myself against the door, my breath coming in short, terrified gasps. It started to move toward me, slow and deliberate, its limbs creaking like old wood. The whispers grew louder, swirling around me, filling my head with a sickening dread. I pounded on the door, screaming for help, but no one was there. No one could hear me. Just as the figure reached the middle of the room, my flashlight died. The room plunged into total darkness, and all I could hear was the slow, ragged breathing. And then it spoke. "You don't belong here." I don't remember what happened after that. I must have blacked out, because when I woke up, it was morning. The door was open, the room was empty, and everything looked normal, but I knew it wasn't. Something had been there, something was there. I quit that job the next day. I didn't even bother telling my boss what happened. He wouldn't have believed me anyway. But I know what I saw, what I heard. I'll never forget that voice. And sometimes, late at night, when everything's quiet, I can still hear the faintest sound of breathing behind me.